Shortly after midnight on June 5, 1968, pandemonium struck in the pantry of Los Angeles' Ambassador Hotel. Amid spilled coffee, screaming onlookers, and flashing camera bulbs, a 17-year-old busboy named Juan Romero knelt on the cold concrete floor, cradling the bleeding, mortally wounded Robert F. Kennedy. The young senator and Democratic presidential hopeful had just finished delivering a triumphant victory speech after winning the California primary. Moments later, he was shot in the head and neck. In the middle of the chaos, Romero heard Kennedy's final words. "Is everybody okay?" A whisper, a selfless concern for others as blood streamed from his wounds. Within hours, Kennedy was gone, and the country was in mourning. Again. Just 5 years after the assassination of his brother John F. Kennedy, another Kennedy had fallen to an assassin's bullet. But this time, questions began to rise immediately, and over the next 5 decades, those questions would only deepen. Was it really as simple as one angry young man with a revolver? Or was something much bigger at play? Welcome to Bad Things. Join us as we examine the evidence, retrace the night, and ask what most likely happened in the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. On to Chicago. Victory turns to tragedy. June 4th to 5th, 1968. June 4th, 1968 was a night of triumph for Robert F. Kennedy. After weeks of intense campaigning across the United States, he had just secured a crucial victory in the California Democratic primary, putting him in strong contention for the party's nomination. That night, the ballroom at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles was filled with celebration. Shortly after midnight on June 5th, Kennedy stepped onto a small stage to address the jubilant crowd. He thanked his supporters, complimented his staff, and ended his speech with a short, upbeat send-off. "My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there." Smiling, he waved and stepped off the stage. Ethel Kennedy, his pregnant wife, stood nearby. There was no Secret Service protection. In 1968, candidates didn't receive it. So RFK's security consisted mostly of friends and volunteers, including Rafer Johnson, Rosie Greer, and journalist George Plimpton. Instead of returning through the ballroom crowd, the group was led through a side route, a narrow service hallway that passed through the hotel's kitchen pantry. At the front was Carl Uecker, the hotel de maître, guiding the senator toward a press area. The kitchen was dimly lit, crowded with hotel workers, and humid. Several staff members leaned in to shake Kennedy's hand, including Juan Romero, a teenage busboy who had idolized him. Kennedy reached out to shake Romero's hand, and then, without warning, gunshots rang out. The shooting. At approximately 12:15 a.m., a small man stepped from the crowd and opened fire with a .22 caliber revolver. The first shots were fired at close range. Robert Kennedy was struck almost immediately. As screams filled the corridor, Carl Uecker grabbed the gunman's arm, slamming it onto a metal steam table and trying to push it away. A chaotic struggle followed. Multiple men, including Rafer Johnson, Rosie Greer, and George Plimpton, piled on the shooter, wrestling him to the ground. But in that brief moment, he had managed to fire all 8 bullets in his revolver. Kennedy fell to the floor. He had been hit 3 times, once behind the right ear and twice in the back. A 4th bullet passed through his jacket without striking him. 5 other people were also wounded in the chaos. Paul Schrade, a Kennedy aide, William Weissel, a TV news producer, Elizabeth Evans, a campaign volunteer, Ira Goldstein, a Democratic delegate, Erwin Stoll, a teenage Kennedy supporter. As Kennedy lay on the floor bleeding, Juan Romero crouched beside him. He took off his rosary and placed it in Kennedy's hand. He tried to keep him awake. "Is everybody okay?" Kennedy asked. Those were his last coherent words. Moments later, he lost consciousness. The shooter was immediately restrained. He gave his name as Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, a 24-year-old immigrant from Jerusalem who had been living in Pasadena. Fight for life. Ambulances rushed Kennedy to Good Samaritan Hospital, where a team of surgeons began emergency brain surgery. For 26 hours, they worked to save his life, but the damage was too severe. At 1:44 a.m. on June 6th, Robert Kennedy was pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. The country, already reeling from the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. just 2 months earlier, now faced another national trauma. Robert Kennedy had been seen by many as a unifying figure, a beacon of hope in a divided and violent year. As news of his death spread, crowds gathered outside the hospital. Others lined the streets as his body, in a flag-draped casket, was transported to the airport. A state funeral was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, and a slow-moving funeral train carried Kennedy's remains to Washington, D.C., watched by tens of thousands along the tracks. The arrest and evidence. Back in Los Angeles, Sirhan was taken into custody. He had been caught at the scene, holding the murder weapon, an Ivor Johnson .22 caliber revolver. At his family home, police found notebooks filled with obsessive and chilling repetition. RFK must die. RFK must be killed. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated by June 5, 1968. Investigators also found newspaper clippings about Kennedy's support for selling fighter jets to Israel, something Sirhan, a Christian Palestinian, was deeply opposed to. He told police he felt betrayed, saying Kennedy was instrumental in supporting what he viewed as oppression of Palestinians. The trial. In February 1969, Sirhan stood trial for the murder of Robert F. Kennedy. His defense did not dispute that he had fired the shots. They focused instead on his mental state. Psychiatric experts testified that Sirhan was in a dissociative or trance-like state during the shooting. But the jury was not convinced. With multiple eyewitnesses, physical evidence, and his own written declarations, Sirhan was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. But in 1972, California's Supreme Court overturned the state's death penalty, commuting his sentence to life in prison. Lingering doubts. Over the next decades, doubts began to emerge. Why did the autopsy say the fatal shots came from behind when witnesses saw Sirhan in front? Why were there more bullet holes than Sirhan's gun could have fired? Who was the woman in the polka dot dress seen fleeing the scene? Despite numerous official reviews, including a 1975 panel and a California state inquiry, the official conclusion never changed. Sirhan acted alone. The case was closed. But for many, it has never been settled. Number 1. The official story. Sirhan acted alone. The version presented at trial, and reaffirmed by every official investigation since 1968, is that Sirhan acted alone. He approached from the front, pulled a .22 caliber revolver, and shot Robert Kennedy at close range, striking him 3 times and wounding 5 others. He had a clear motive: rage over Kennedy's pro-Israel stance. Inside his home, police found spiral notebooks filled with obsessive lines like, "RFK must die. RFK must be killed. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated by June 5, 1968. Sirhan confessed multiple times. He told investigators that Kennedy was a traitor to the Palestinian cause and deserved to die. At trial, his defense didn't deny that he fired the shots. Prosecutors presented a clean case. 8 bullets fired. All shots accounted for. Physical evidence tied the bullets to Sirhan's gun. Inconsistencies, such as witness claims that Sahan never got close enough for a point-blank shot, were chalked up to confusion in the chaos. He could have leaned in, Kennedy could have turned. That's enough to close the gap, one investigator later said. Despite lingering questions, courts have consistently upheld Sahan's guilt. No retrial or evidentiary hearing has ever been granted. Number 2. The second gunman theory. Sahan as distraction. The most enduring and forensically grounded challenge to the official story is the second gunman theory. This posits that Sahan did fire, but not the fatal shots. Coroner Thomas Noguchi determined that the fatal bullet entered from behind Kennedy's right ear, fired at 1 to 3 inches from his head. A point-blank shot. Yet every eyewitness said Sahan was in front of Kennedy and never got behind him. Carl Euchre, standing next to Kennedy, swore in an affidavit there was a distance of at least 1 1/2 feet between Sahan's gun and the senator's head. Sahan never got close enough for a point-blank shot. Never. Then there's the bullet count. Sahan's revolver held 8 bullets, yet photos, police reports and witness testimony describe at least 10 bullet holes in the pantry, including in the doorframe and ceiling panels. FBI agent William Bailey later said, "I could see 2 bullets clearly lodged in the wood." One former LAPD detective claimed to have seen an internal report listing 10 bullets. Yet the extra bullets were never logged. And worse, the doorframe and ceiling tiles were destroyed just after Sahan's conviction. Suspicion has long fallen on Thane Cesar, a private security guard walking directly behind Kennedy. He admitted drawing his weapon, but claimed he didn't fire. One witness, Don Shulman, gave a live radio interview shortly after the shooting, saying he saw the security guard fire back. Cesar owned a .22 caliber revolver, sold it soon after the assassination, and was never treated as a suspect. LAPD never test-fired his gun. He later moved to the Philippines, where he died in 2019. To this day, many argue the physical evidence only makes sense if a second shooter fired the fatal shots from behind Kennedy, while Sahan, in front, played a different role altogether. Number 3. The polka dot dress mystery. Witness to a conspiracy? Several witnesses reported seeing a mysterious young woman in a white dress with dark polka dots in the hotel shortly before and after the shooting. Sandra Serrano, a 20-year-old volunteer, was sitting on a stairwell when she saw a young couple rush by. According to her, the girl turned and said, "We shot him. We shot Kennedy." She repeated this claim to NBC hours later. LAPD responded by subjecting her to an aggressive interrogation, during which polygraph examiner Sergeant Enrique Hernandez tried to force her to recant. "Nobody told you we shot Kennedy. This didn't happen." Other witnesses, including Vincent DiPiero, a pantry worker, saw a woman in a polka dot dress standing next to Sahan shortly before the gunfire. Sergeant Paul Sharaga, who spoke to another couple that heard the same line, "We shot Kennedy," issued an all-points bulletin on the woman. He was later told to cancel it. "We don't want them to get anything started on a big conspiracy," someone said over the radio. Years later, Sharaga found that his report had been altered. His quote was changed from "We shot Kennedy" to "They shot Kennedy." The LAPD concluded that the polka dot dress story was a hoax, perhaps a case of mistaken identity. But the woman was never identified, and Serrano never wavered once she was free of police pressure. To many, the mystery woman remains the most visible sign that Sahan was not alone. Number 4. The Manchurian Candidate Hypothesis. Mind-controlled patsy. Sahan's behavior during and after the shooting raised red flags. He appeared calm, smiling. He never tried to flee. And from day one, he claimed, "I don't remember firing any shots." Psychiatrists who evaluated him testified he was highly susceptible to hypnosis and that he likely fell into a trance-like state. Under hypnosis, he described being at a firing range, shooting at targets. not in a hotel. Some researchers, including Dr. Herbert Spiegel, believe Sirhan may have been hypno-programmed to kill, or to appear to kill, without understanding what he was doing. This theory ties into CIA project MK Ultra, which had studied mind control and hypnosis in California and beyond. Documents from the 1970s confirm the CIA's interest in creating unwitting assassins. One version suggests Sirhan's revolver was loaded with blanks or low-powered rounds, and that his real role was to create a spectacle while another person fired the real shots. Witnesses reported seeing what looked like shredded paper floating in the air during the shooting, a detail sometimes linked to blank cartridges. Sirhan's notebooks, filled with repeated lines about killing RFK, are sometimes seen not as proof of guilt, but of programming. While still considered fringe by many, this theory has gained traction with new forensic and psychological studies. Number 5. The CIA, the Mafia, or a coordinated plot. The final and broadest theory is that Robert F. Kennedy was eliminated by a high-level conspiracy, possibly involving the CIA, organized crime, or both. Investigative journalist Shane O'Sullivan claimed to have identified 3 known CIA operatives, David Morales, Gordon Campbell, and George Joanides, in news footage from the hotel that night. One former CIA colleague claimed Morales had bragged, "I was in Dallas when we got the son of a bitch, and I was in LA when we got the little bastard." Though disputed by other researchers, the possibility of rogue CIA involvement has persisted. Other versions point to the Mafia, which Robert Kennedy had aggressively prosecuted as Attorney General. Mob bosses like Sam Giancana and Jimmy Hoffa had both motive and potential connections. Author Lisa Pease suggested that Robert Mayhew, a former CIA contractor with Mafia ties, may have orchestrated the hit, possibly using hypnotists, cutouts, and professional shooters. Cesar, the guard behind Kennedy, had once worked for a security firm linked to Mayhew. The theory goes that RFK was too dangerous to too many people. If elected, he might have reopened investigations into JFK's assassination, exposed CIA secrets, or dismantled covert Cold War operations. But this theory, though dramatic, is harder to prove. Much of it depends on anecdotal quotes, obscure connections, and circumstantial overlaps. Still, it ties together many of the loose ends from other theories, and for some, that makes it all the more plausible. More than half a century later, the question still lingers. Who really killed Robert F. Kennedy? The official version, that Sirhan, acting alone, pulled out a revolver and fired the fatal shots, has never fully accounted for the forensic evidence. And when those physical facts are laid bare, they reveal a pattern that leads away from the lone gunman theory and towards something far more unsettling, yet paradoxically, more straightforward. It begins with the autopsy. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the Los Angeles County coroner, found that all 3 bullets that struck Kennedy came from behind, fired at extremely close range, with the fatal shot entering behind the right ear from no more than 3 inches away. That finding was never disputed. It's physical science. Yet not one credible witness placed Sirhan behind Kennedy at any point. On the contrary, every eyewitness, including Carl Uecker, who grabbed Sirhan's arm, placed him squarely in front, several feet away. Uecker later testified under oath that Sirhan never got close enough for a point-blank shot. This isn't a detail that can be waved away by confusion in the moment. It's the central forensic contradiction of the case. And once you accept that the fatal shot came from behind, and that Sirhan was never behind Kennedy, there is only one logical conclusion. Someone else fired that shot. Supporting that conclusion is the simple arithmetic of the bullet count. Sirhan's revolver held 8 rounds. But multiple witnesses, including an FBI agent and hotel staff, observed additional bullet holes in the pantry walls and ceiling. Photographic evidence shows what appear to be embedded bullets. If even one of those extra impacts is legitimate, then more than 8 bullets were fired, which means there was a second gun. And when LAPD officials ordered the destruction of the doorframes and ceiling tiles shortly after Sirhan's conviction, despite pending appeals, the act looked less like routine evidence handling and more like the erasure of inconvenient facts. So who fired the fatal shot? One name consistently reappears: Thane Eugene Cesar. A private security guard hired to protect Kennedy, Cesar was positioned directly behind him as they walked through the pantry. He admitted to drawing his weapon, a .22 revolver, the same caliber as Sirhan's, but claimed he never fired it. Yet one witness, Don Schulman, told a live radio audience that he saw the security guard fire his weapon. Cesar later sold that gun. It was never tested by LAPD, and he was never treated as a suspect. The department accepted his statement without question and didn't even call him to testify. Years later, journalist Dan Moldea, initially skeptical of conspiracy claims, tracked down Cesar and conducted a polygraph, which Cesar passed. Still, doubts remained. His political leanings, including support for segregationist candidate George Wallace, made him an ideological opponent of Kennedy's. He had also previously worked for a company linked to Robert Mayhew, a CIA contractor with ties to the mafia, and long rumored to be involved in covert operations, including assassination plots. Cesar denied involvement until his death in 2019. But what makes him difficult to dismiss is not circumstantial guilt, it's proximity. He was directly behind Robert Kennedy, holding his arm in the precise position necessary to fire the fatal shots described by Noguchi. No other known person was in that spot, and no one else had a weapon. The role of Sirhan then takes on a new shape. He was not innocent, but he may not have been fully conscious of what he was doing. He opened fire, yes, and wounded 5 people, but his own statements over the years have remained disturbingly consistent. He remembers nothing of the shooting. Under hypnosis, he described being at a firing range, not a hotel. Psychiatric experts described him as highly hypnotizable, susceptible to trance states, and possibly programmed in a way that made him act without understanding. The idea that Sirhan may have been manipulated, possibly by someone who approached him earlier in the night, is supported by his own vague recollections of a young woman offering him coffee just before the shooting. That woman has never been identified, but multiple witnesses reported seeing a girl in a polka dot dress fleeing the scene, laughing and shouting, "We shot him." That line, heard by more than one person and quickly buried by investigators, suggests coordination. It also suggests that Sirhan wasn't alone, and may not have even been the primary actor. This is where the case moves from confusion to clarity. Sirhan, a Palestinian Christian angry over Kennedy's support for Israel, provided the perfect motive, the perfect visual, and the perfect fall guy. But the killing required more than motive. It required access, aim, and an angle of fire that Sirhan never had. It required someone already behind Kennedy, someone like Cesar, and a sequence of events so tightly choreographed that the autopsy, the bullet count, and the witness accounts all fall into place. What followed was not a thorough investigation, but a strategy of damage control. Evidence was destroyed. Contradictory witnesses were silenced or discredited. The LAPD, already reeling from the trauma of the era, seemed unwilling to open another chapter of uncertainty after the chaos of Dallas in 1963. A lone gunman arrested at the scene with a gun in his hand and hate in his notebook was easier to explain than a deeper conspiracy. The narrative was closed, but the case wasn't. To this day, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. maintains that Sirhan did not kill his father. He's read the autopsy. He's reviewed the witness accounts. He's even visited Sir Han in prison. There is no way he could have done it alone, he said. Another victim of the shooting, Paul Schrade, has gone even further. He believes Sir Han shot him, but not Kennedy. I was there, Schrade said. I saw it. Sir Han shot me, but he did not shoot Robert Kennedy. That's the simplest version of events that fits the evidence. Not the neatest, not the most politically palatable, but the most likely.